Good evening and most welcome to (1687). I will make a little recap of both Paul Johnston's Wittgenstein Rethinking the Inner and Joachim Schulte's Experience and Expression. Wittgenstein's philosophy of psychology. I will just start off by mentioning the very different style of doing philosophy that is the style of Wittgenstein. I would say it is extraordinarily different. Instead of piling up arguments, proofs, evidence, and strong reasons for accepted persistent thesis, the writings of Wittgenstein seems not containing a complete thesis, a different worldview, or even a philosophy in any of the perceived ways. Instead, he invites you to look at things in different ways and to see whether these different ways fit your choice, your disposition. It is like ordinary philosophy tries to convince you in a certain direction using methods of rhetorics, twisting. It's a bit exaggerated. Well, at least modifying things. So you are led to a certain belief, a certain understanding. An opening up of pre-made ideas, how thinking, language, the world should, so to say, roll out or develop, how the world should be, so to speak, before it is there. deciding what the world is before it has any chance to have its own words. Often philosophy is that way. I think the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, at least in the common conception of it, which will do just fine for my example, where there are rules for understanding decided in advance. The approach of Wittgenstein is radically different from this Kantian approach. It doesn't try to prove, convince in that manner, to buy the reader into a certain unified, coherent, or whatever you like, worldview that would dominate it. It instead speaks to the natural tendencies of language. It is not after Chomskyan rules of a universal grammar. No, it doesn't tell us what the grammar of language is. Rather, that we sometimes infer a priori rules or ideas for how it should behave. Rules that once obeyed, it's a hard word, will impose their limiting force on your life world. He often refers to this as clarification. And he says and writes that the duty of the philosopher is not to impose his thinking on the life world or language, or if you like, ontology, but to clarify misunderstandings of how the world works. And when Wittgenstein speaks of the grammar of language, he does not mean it in the way of a grammar book or pre-arranged ideas of how plural should be done from a noun, or how you add pastness to a verb using a suffix, like walk to walked. Now, breaking the rules in Wittgenstein's sense is not breaking pre-made rules, constructed in advance or imposed on language, or being there since the Big Bang of languages. There is an image that comes to mind that usual philosophy is a bit more close to an elephant walking into a store selling fine china. Wittgenstein is almost like a painter that paints up scenes, invites you to try them out, see what they mean for you. See what they can infer. One saying from Wittgenstein is that we have been captive, we have been held captive, I even think it is, by picture. Wittgenstein is using other, it's very pictorial, other pictures to help us see that there is a picture behind our normal sense of thinking. That, as we say, or think, our normal views are made from purely arguments, logic, words, causality. And that there is no underlying picture or image. Wittgenstein is introducing the idea, one could say, this is the smoothest way I can express it. He introduces the idea that underneath it all, could it be, can you feel in your inner, can you feel in your thinking, doings, that it could be the case? Does that appeal to you? Does that ring a bell, to have a very small expression? Could that actually be a possibility? And we do not need to accept that, but just opening up a bit the theatre curtain, that there could be a picture behind all, is enough. What is that picture? Well, it wouldn't be fair of me to describe the picture in words that are less pictorial, so to speak. But since that's the only way I can go about these things, my level, I'm no Wittgenstein. I will still do it with the risk of gravely misleading you. But one idea I can relate to very much myself is that there are words and they're referring things in the world. And what that worldview, that picture is, that I am inside of myself. The words I speak is inside of me, coming out towards the outer world, directed outwards. And forcing their power outwards. And referring to the objects, if you like, of the world, and the idea that objects is a special kind, which is for me one of those pre-made rules, Kantian rules, in this exaggerated Kant, that says there are things like objects. Wittgenstein would say that the word, concept, or whatever you like, object, is used in most specific circumstances, and that object in itself is the mistake. That we do not use the word object in that way to speak of objects in the world, other than in rare circumstances with a very limited meaning. I think one parallel here could be from the British / Maltese researcher, neurologist Edward de Bono, who tried to show that the word concept truth has been overused or misused when it should be used in a very limited and especially specific way. And one of his sayings were that truth is a relation of properties that give a certain result. A bit dry, but that is a more correct way of using the word truth as a result of two factors combined. A bit like a computer, the computer word for truth. That is a more grammatically correct way of handling the word truth than implying or using truth everywhere where it's suited, but also where it's not suited. It's in a way defense of the expression truth, because if misused it will lose its effect even when it's due, when it does have its place. If you no longer understand its use, you will not only use it when it doesn't do anything, you will also miss out on using it when it's proper. You will lose the command of it. It's very similar to if you start using a hammer for everything, and especially if you never used a hammer from the beginning, you will not be able to discriminate if you start out sort of hitting everything, a screw, a piece of wood on the wrong side, then you will never learn. it's a dangerous word, but it's almost like you will be able to infer skill in your ability with the words. This grammar doesn't take true or false value, it's a gliding scale. You will gain proficiency in your language, in your concepts, the things that rules everything that is about you and your context, your environment, your interactions with wants, willingness, feelings, emotions, so forth. There's another thing I think of which is, I think, a very close parallel to Wittgenstein, is an odd thing. Sorry for the very far-fetched argument here, but when it comes to the underarm, there are two bones, ulnar and radius, and half the population has a different perception of which of the bones move over which one is, so to speak, axial, and which moves about that axial. Only one is movable. Misunderstanding this and ipso facto using it in the wrong way. You see here, misuse, using it in the wrong way is one of the important things. The constant misuse from you of the ulnar and radius is the same as not understanding. It's in the doing. So what Wittgenstein is saying, don't change your concepts of what you're doing, at least not only. Change how you do it by that is understanding. In this changed use, your knowledge comes in the act, in the acting, in the movement, if you like. Sorry, I sound a bit vague here. So what Wittgenstein is describing, not so much how you should use it, but rather your misconception that the radius go over the ulnar or vice versa, or the misconception that there is no movement, the misconception of stability, fixatedness, which makes for a very weird move in the arm. Learning to use the word truth when it's suited, when it suits the circumstances, the moment, what you want from it, will make the effect of the use of the word truth greater, bigger, more rewarding. So you could call it skill. It's a bit stretched as well, but you could call it a skill of using the words, the expressions. And this is understanding, of course, for every time you will hit the nail a bit better with your newly acquired skill of using an everyday tool. Because hammer is a very everyday thing. It's not something complicated like a surgeon's knife or not even a stick shift. It's absolutely simple. I would say language is even simpler. It's been with you since you were only a toddler. And therefore, that might sound like an advantage, but it's also something that makes it very problematic to see what everyday mistakes you do. And it's not only, there is a parallel here between Martin Heidegger and Ludwig Wittgenstein. It's odd, these two great thinkers, definitely among the greatest thinkers of the last century, had little if no comments about each other, very few, and some of them were also misconceptions. One of the views of Martin Heidegger was also of the earlier Wittgenstein, much different Wittgenstein. And he felt him to be eerie. Something I think Wittgenstein would have, at least to some degree, agreed with. But Heidegger also wants to go to some before place, and he seeks it in antiquity. To see how we forgot the Seinsfrage, the question of why, and how we had to make do with what and where. But the most important, the why, got lost. This is similar to the truth example. The correct way of using the word truth, the concept truth, is its why, its proper place. It is not at all any sort of advantage if it's used in improper places. It destroys its capability to work like the hammer. Wittgenstein is pointing to being. There are similarities, most definitely. Another example I could give: when I learned to ride the bicycle, for some reason I mislearned it. I put too much weight on the left side. That became customary, a habit, or the way I used the bike. That's even more accurate than call it a habit. Me, bike, doing it, all connected. That makes it so much harder to discover because it's all integrated. And the solution is not, as one would think, to take the thing apart and show, Hans, you put in too much weight on the left side, and you have become a customer to that. No. Better is to show that there is an underlying image that started the whole thing. And this is where the sophistication, or what is peculiar with Wittgenstein, comes in. I think that is the most unique, that there is an underlying image of things. In the case of the ulnar, what could that image be? I think a good guess is that we possibly see us as mechanic dolls, and that you are not the arm, you move your arm somehow. It's not you, it's a tool or a thing that happens to be attached to you. You is here or here somewhere. And this is not in any way you. When it comes to this is definitely, the two books have this in common. Schulte's and Johnston deals with that period when he was especially interested in factors that we call psychological. And thinking is one of those. And this is too much of a mess to bring up here when I do this sort of review of the books. But that is, thinking is over universalized. It is used as a word or as a concept definitely too often and in the wrong circumstances. It shares some traits with truth. Sometimes it is extremely fitting, and you can say to someone, I really thought this through. And that has an effect, gives transfer, decidedness, intention, resoluteness, that the decision really is well founded in your gut, in your world. But to say that thinking is like truth used indiscriminately too often, and it becomes an ongoing process, definitely makes you more dull, less decisive. And in the end, and now I'm exaggerating to state an example, but in the end, instead of saying, I thought this carefully through, and I will do the following, buy a new suit or something, your thinking becomes muddled and you will not be that decided, because thinking is misused, overused, thrown about too much. like some of those elevator music that destroys the girl from Ipanema. So you don't want to listen to it, or it does more harm than good, which is an incredible shame. Thinking of the beautiful voice of Gilberto's wife. In the end, you end up that thinking accompanies or just together with your actions. You will become clumsy, undecided, not clear, directed, strong. And as usual, it's a matter of degree. It's very far from a grammar that has clear wrongs and clear rights. Once more, it's very similar to Alexander technique by Frederick Matthias Alexander. Bring up this as an example of you who are familiar with that. But also there is not a right, correct way of doing it. A pre-made Kantian rule for movement. Instead, it's about curiosity, being interested, trying something out. And how can you become interested? Well, only if you have a teacher who, in a soft way, teaches you. You're not being told how things are. You are not forced into pre-made understanding like the Socratic meiotique. Where the truth is always out there and there's no creativity, it's fixed. Best way to teach, I'm not a teacher, but is always to bring curiosity to the student. So said my first teacher. Bring interest, those glistening eyes of the pupil, and that's all you can do. And go out and investigate the world, your own knowledge, but don't force it or argue for it in a fixed way. It is an invitation that doesn't change anything in what you're doing really, or at least doesn't change your conception of it. At least not directly. It's a much slower, ongoing learning that slowly